Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Rescue Michigan show here on YouTube. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Apologize for a little bit of feedback, but we've got two special guests tonight. Let me try to get better centered and frame here. In the studio here, we have Tony DeMott, and we also have Dan Thiele from the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. And we've got a lot to talk about, guys, and I think their perspective is going to be very helpful about this. What we've experienced in the last week has been two major things. One is the continuing refusal of the chair of the Elections Committee to bring the Rescue Michigan bills up for a vote in committee or even a hearing. And more recently, after nearly 10,000 petitions were delivered to our state lawmakers, the Senate Oversight Committee has released a report saying, no, we don't want to have any more audits. Any more audits would be bad. No more audits, anybody. And it appears they're going to have another week of session next week, and that's going to be about it. And by the way, Dan, we are getting some feedback, so if you can turn your volume down just enough so that you can still hear me, that'll probably make that a lot better on our end, because it's going to be a little bit distracting for the listeners. So, just so you guys all know, the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership is an educational organization that's been around, I think around 13 years now, if I'm not mistaken. I know the first time I attended one of their lectures was in 2008, so that was 13 years ago. And since then, they've been training thousands and thousands of grassroots leaders all over the country. And what we're seeing happen right now in Michigan is not something that's unusual. Oh, he says, I wish we had name cards to identify ourselves. Let me introduce everybody. So I'm Adam D'Angeli. I'm on the left from Rescue Michigan. Tony DeMott is there in the center. And Dan Thiele is on the right. So I could maybe try to put in some name cards at some point, but it would probably be a little bit distracting for me because we're trying to run the show at the same time here. This isn't, as you can tell, a high budget operation. But that being said, let me go back to introducing our guests. And Dan, you and I haven't worked personally together, so maybe it'd be best if you introduce yourself. I know Tony there, and well, let's start with Tony, because Tony and I have gone back since all the way back to 2008. And Tony, you were an instructor for the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. Is that right?
That's correct. Adam, I think we met when I walked into your shop to ask some questions about the Ron Paul campaign. First time we met.
Hey Tony, can you do me two quick favors?
Sure.
Number one, the air conditioner behind you. Turn the knob 2 clicks till it turns off, because it's generating noise. The lower knob counterclockwise. That will be better. There we go. And then just speak loudly into the mic.
Maybe I can move a little closer to the mic here.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you heard what I said before. I was just commenting on the fact that you and I met. It actually was before 2008. It was maybe 2006, 2007-ish. And I had walked into your shop to ask questions about Ron Paul. And that's the first time we met. Since then, there was plenty of work with the Ron Paul campaign. I've been an instructor with the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership, and I am currently the president of.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to turn the noise gate off because I think that's giving us a little bit of problem here. They say you're still too soft, so just speak as loudly as you can, Tony, when you're up. But Dan, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your involvement in the various states in which you've operated. And you told me a little bit about what's been going on in Indiana. It certainly sounds like something familiar. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's been happening over there?
Well, can you hear me okay at this point, Adam?
You sound great.
Okay. So I attended my first class, political leadership school, with the foundation back in 2013, and Tony actually hosted that class. I trekked up to Michigan for that class, the world famous Token Lounge, and so the training really resonated with me, and I wanted to make a difference in my home state of Indiana. And so I started hosting schools and started gathering conservatives who wanted to use a different model, a model that was going to be effective to change the political landscape in Indiana. And we now have we work with cooperatively with the National Association for Gun Rights. I'm a part-time contractor with the National Association for Gun Rights, a no compromise Second Amendment advocacy group. We also have a no compromise life group in Indiana and a no compromise medical liberty group in Indiana. And they have been working very hard to pressure the legislature. And this year we had a very exciting turn of events by pushing for a roll call vote to protect preemies. Indiana currently had a horrible policy where the preemies were born before 24 weeks. Indiana hospitals would just let them die on the table. And so our inside leaders and our grassroots folks pushed for a vote, and the supermajority of Republicans in our legislature voted against protecting those preemies. We lost the vote 3-90, but we kept pressuring them, and we embarrassed them so badly that 10 days after they voted against protecting the preemies, they were in a panic to pass legislation to protect the preemies, because we had made it so uncomfortable for them. Their political environment was being controlled by our people, our grassroots. And so at the end of the day, we ended up forcing them to give us two other hard-hitting roll call votes, and we got the policy. As of July 1 of this year, a preemie in Indiana has just as much right to medical care as anybody on this phone call. And so the tactics that I think you are going to need to use to get legislators to go ahead and do what they need to do are probably going to be the same ones that work for us in Indiana, and the ones the foundation teaches, which is, we have to get it through our heads as liberty people, as conservatives, that not only the Democrats, but most of the Republicans are going to need motivation to do the right thing. We got to get them off the pedestal. We got to quit pretending they're our friends.
Yep, that's exactly right. By the way, I saw in the chat, Dave J asks, how many of you have actually went door knocking and phone calling with a candidate? I have with several. I've run several campaigns, and I'll bet you guys have done some door knocking in your day. Perhaps just some lid dropping, but I'll bet a lot of door knocking too. And if it's the Dave J, I think it is, we're talking to a member of the legislature, a former member of the legislature himself, a rather notorious one at that. But we're going to come to that before too long, talking about door knocking. And well, why don't we start with this point? Let's go back to the relationship we currently have with the legislature, which when we started at Rescue Michigan, our intention from the get-go was to work cooperatively with them from start to finish. And as we envisioned it, this was going to be a great opportunity for everybody all around, for highlighting the most egregious problems in Michigan's election system, motivating the grassroots to go out, get petition signatures, organize their precincts, have a great policy fight that the legislature would actually get a wonderful win on if they, were able to pass an election reform law, which in Michigan would not be subject to the governor's veto. If you get enough signatures, it's called a citizen-initiated law. And that's all gone haywire in just the last few weeks. It began with us actually finding 7 members of the State House to introduce 7 bills on what we consider some of the most important elements of election reform that had not been introduced in any other bill in either chamber at that point. And then, strangely, the committee chair didn't want to have a hearing. And she said, well, I've got all these other bills. These are also important and yada, yada, yada. We kind of knew where it was going right from the get-go, but we did our due diligence. We looked to see what other bills she thought were more important, and most of them weren't doing much of anything. And we continued to ask, and we continued to get ignored, and we continued to get stonewalled. And that's when we started calling this out. Now, that was only a couple weeks ago, but what's happened just this past week was that these tens of thousands, I think about 10,000 petitions were delivered to the legislature. And by the way, Dan, this is strange. Well, not strange, but a little unusual. The people that collected these petitions really went over the top to show how serious the people signing the petitions were, and they had them all notarized. All of them were submitted as notarized affidavits calling upon the legislature to have a serious forensic audit above and beyond what the Secretary of State had as an audit of the 2020 election. And just this past week, the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee put out a 35-page report telling them all to buzz off. And we've done enough audits. Any further audits would be totally counterproductive and aren't going to prove anything, and there's no reason to do any of that stuff. So what's your take on all that? What does this sound like to you? Maybe you can give us an example of maybe some other things that have happened in other legislatures where they've kind of gone this way.
Well, it's pretty standard for members of the political class to not want to do anything. They have what they want. They've been elected to public office, and they're aware that if they do much of anything, especially anything on a controversial issue, they're going to make someone mad. And so from their point of view, most members of the political class, they want to sound like they're taking action, maybe pretend like they're taking action, but not take meaningful action on controversial issues. So what they're going to do whenever possible is try to get someone who wants action on a controversial issue. They're going to try to get you to go away, and they want to give you as little as possible in the course of sending you away. So one of the things we teach in the political leadership school is very important advice you should carry with you throughout your career. Whenever a member of the political class offers to explain something to you, or tells you how politics works, or gives you political advice, there's a critical question you should ask yourself. And that question is, if I believe this person and I do what they say, how does it benefit them? And so if I just follow through, I'll answer my own rhetorical question. If this committee chair or this Senate group of senators, they're telling the activists, they're telling the Michigan folks who want to get the election reform done, they're telling you to go away, that all the investigations have been done, and that this is in good hands. Now, if you believe them and do what they say, you're going to just go quietly into the night, and your reform effort is going to fizzle. So it's very important that you not take their political advice, and instead you push back with more pressure.
Yep. By the way, Maggie in the chat says, Trump mentioned Michigan just now. We're competing. President right now was giving a speech, I think in Ohio, and yeah, he's going to be talking about Michigan. He put out a statement in response to that Senate report. You mentioned the politicians trying to explain it to you, trying to get it away. One of the things that we've seen, there's another tactic, which is sometimes getting others, surrogates, to get you to go away and explain it to you. There was an email that went around from, let's just say, somebody who works in Lansing this past week, with a group that we've been friendly with for the past year or so. And the message was, why are you being so critical and so harsh? They've passed so many great election reform bills already in the House, and I don't want to take you through it right now. We've done a video on this where we went through each and every election bill that's passed the House and Senate up till this point, and most of them haven't done much of anything. But that's another tactic too, isn't it? Having surrogates explaining to your people why you're doing the wrong thing.
Of course, the political class will use surrogates to whine, on their behalf. They will use surrogates to explain things to you on their behalf. The political class will also use surrogates to threaten you on their behalf. And depending on what this could be a combination of whining, explaining, and maybe even a soft threat to your people that you won't take it seriously anymore, and you're only hurting your own cause and things like that. But yeah, we see this in the life movement. The compromising members of the life movement in Indiana, that's usually Right to Life. They will frequently give a rough time to our no compromise life group, Hoosiers for Life, and try to say things like, why aren't you being nice to these legislators? They're doing the best they can. All we can do is regulate abortion a little bit around the edges. And, we just treat them. How we handle that is we treat those folks as members of the political class. And so even though you have worked with this group in the past, even though you may have done good things with this group in the past, in my opinion, from what you've just told me about this email, they have been spun. At the very least, they have been spun by the legislators. And the worst scenario is their leadership might actually be in on this with the legislators. But either way, the best response for your group is you now need to treat these former allies, at least for now, as members of the political class. And so you need to come right back to asking that question. If we were to believe this email and do what they're telling us in this email, how would it benefit the legislators? And of course, the question answers itself. If you believe that email, you would lay off with the pressure, and then they're just going to dance away into summer recess on you.
Exactly. And the point I would make here is you're not from Michigan, and yet you've seen this before. Tony has seen this before. I have seen this before. This is a standard pattern, and I like that you said they explain it to you, they whine, sometimes they threaten. Now, the email that I was talking about didn't contain any threats. However, the Senate Oversight Committee report most certainly did. In fact, if all the Senate report did was say, here's why audits are bad, and it was just an explanation, I mean, it would be irritating. But what they actually did was single out two individuals and personally accuse them. This is a report that's been in the international press, right? Trump is talking about this in Ohio tonight. He put out a statement about it yesterday. In this report, they singled out two individuals. One of them was the attorney in the Antrim County lawsuit. The other is a former state senator who's been threatened to be sued by Dominion, and accused them of personally profiteering for their claims of election fraud. And that to me is so far over the line of what's legitimate activity for a legislative office to do. I mean, that certainly sounds like a threat to me, does it not?
Absolutely. And it's meant as a message to the rest of you, back off or you're next.
Yep. But that's not what we do, is it? And by the way, I want to get Tony back into this call, but we have two difficulties here. There was some issues with Tony's sound before, and also Tony can't hear Dan. So we were struggling with the audio in the beginning, and like I said, guys, I'm new at this, and I do apologize. We tried to have an in-studio guest and somebody who was also in online. So Tony is hearing me, but not Dan. Dan can hear both of us. But Tony, maybe you've got some stories here of threats that you've seen, explanations you've seen, or maybe we can even talk about right to work in Michigan. But I mean, give us some examples of how this exact same thing has happened elsewhere.
Well, right to work was definitely the most violent.
Speak up, Tony.
Maybe let me scoot up here. How's that?
Better.
Okay. Well, right to work was where I definitely saw the most violence. And that was coming from all different directions. It was largely initiated by the activists. I would say, as far as the letter coming from, as far as the letter coming from the other group, that's going to happen. And cannot let it dissuade you. I can name numerous times during the right to work fight, the Obamacare fight, and a few other fights where Tea Party organizations were looking for access. We're doing that to the Campaign for Liberty. And I've had a number of Tea Party leaders that have come back since then and said that they apologized for it. And I was right. The reality is that I stuck to my gun. I didn't bother fighting with those other groups, and I kept my focus on the legislature.
Yep.
And so that's the real key. You folks are right in the beginning of this fight, and you're gonna see more groups that are announcing you. You're going to have more politicians doing the things that politicians do, and ignoring you is the first step. They start telling you that nobody's going to work with you here, and threats might even get a little bit more serious. But the reality is, it's all geared towards getting you to stop.
Yep.
And that's what you absolutely cannot do. Do not stop. Keep your focus on the legislature.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's better with the camera. So, Dan, Tony just mentioned power versus access, and he mentioned other groups, and there's a certain other group, not even the one I was talking about a moment ago, but another one that has been, well, I don't want to rehash personal drama, so I guess just won't, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what the difference is between access and power, because that's a very, very common and dangerous pitfall that Tony was just talking about there.
Well, absolutely. The idea of access is where you have a channel, could be handled many different ways, but you believe you have the ear of one or more of these politicians. And it might be at town hall meetings. It might even be that one of these politicians, while you may have their personal cell phone number and they may have your personal cell phone number, and that makes you feel important because you have their cell phone number, and maybe every now and then you even get to call them and talk to them on the phone, and you feel like you have a seat at the table or you have their ear in this special way. But what you need to understand is they have a lot more control over you in that relationship than you could possibly have over them with an access relationship. Because whenever you have access to a politician, the one thing you can never be is perceived as a threat. And so they are going to seek to use you to keep the grassroots off their case. But if you ever seem to them to now be a political threat, as in you are calling them out, you are holding them accountable, well, they will instantly cut off your access. They won't take your phone calls anymore. You won't get a seat at the exclusive roundtable that you used to be able to be invited to. And so it's so important for the activists that we train. You must recognize access for what it is. And do understand there are big parts of politics where access works great. There are many bills your legislature deals with, just like my home legislature in Indiana, that don't have anything to do with controversial issues. When I teach the classes, I try to explain to the students, probably 95 to 98% of the bills that the Indiana legislature and the Michigan legislature are going to deal with this year are not especially controversial. It might be some mundane thing like some accountants group had an idea for changing the layout of the state tax form. It doesn't change the tax rates at all, but they think it would streamline the tax form in some way that would make figuring the tax, not the amount, but just the figuring of the tax would be easier for paid preparers and for, other residents of Michigan. And with that kind of a change in the law, access works terrific. Why, if you get invited to the right parties and you get to rub elbows with somebody on the tax writing committee, you could get that little wrinkle inserted into a bill and it could get out onto the House floor, work its way over to the Senate. And the next thing you know, the governor is signing it as part of some big package. And the next year, why, the tax forms are going to look a little different. The problem with access like that is it doesn't work with controversial issues. The instant there is going to be some pushback on the other side, access is useless. And guess what? There is a crowd in Michigan, just like in other states, that is going to have their heels dug in because they don't want election reform. They don't want there to be hard and fast rules. They don't want there to be tightness and accountability around the voting process so that a lawful voter's vote is not being diluted by someone who shouldn't be out there voting. So given that you have a group of people who are adamant that there not be election reform, access is useless, and you are going to have to mobilize and confront the politicians. You must mobilize like-minded Michiganders who agree with you that these reforms are vital, and then you must confront the politicians. And if we're right, if Adam's right about the session, they maybe have one more week and then they're going to go on an extended break, you need to increase the pressure, because understand, when you are calling and texting the offices and emailing the offices of these legislators, first of all, they do count the calls. They're aware of the pressure, but you got to understand, you're also tying up their staff. See, when their staff can get nothing else done but handle phone calls and answer emails from constituents who are demanding prompt action on this, then their staff can't be doing other errands for the legislator. So in all of these ways, you are increasing the pressure on the key Michigan legislators who stand between you and getting this reform package to move.
Right. And by the way, and Tony, I do apologize because I'm seeing in the chat some people are still having some kind of issues hearing you. It is my fault. I'm very sorry, man. I know this has not worked out very well for that. However, I assure you, Dan is saying the same things you would say, because they're the same things I've heard from the foundation instructors for a long time. And talking about, reaching out to their offices, it's so frustrating when I hear people say, what's the point? They don't read our messages anyway. And I can tell you, I worked in the legislature for 4 years. I've been on the other end of those calls. And in Lansing, you would be shocked how few phone calls and emails we actually get. Occasionally an organized group will light up the phone lines for a couple of days, and that's about it. You don't really hear very much else from the constituents. It was different in Congress. Congress, you get a couple hundred a day, but they also have dedicated staff just for that. But in Lansing, they only have one phone line. They can get two, but they rarely do. They only have 2 staffers. Jay in the chat says, our legislators send calls to voicemail. Leave a voice message and send them an email. Write a letter to the paper complaining they never responded to your letter. That's another good way to bring heat. In fact, Dan, that might be a good pivot point there to talk a little bit more about applying pressure and what exactly that entails. You mentioned, you mentioned contacting their offices. But one thing I noticed, especially over the summer when they're on extended break, is the legislators themselves have less contact with their staff when they're out of session for weeks and weeks on end. They're in the districts. So maybe talk a little bit about how pressure works in the district, and maybe that'll help address Jay's question there too.
Well, sure. Yeah, the art of applying pressure should be done wherever you can find a way to do it. So I was giving earlier examples that are particularly appropriate while they are in session. But if they are indeed going to be having a break coming up here and they're going to be back in their districts, then activists and leaders need to find a way to bring the pressure to them right in their districts. So you can still use the phone calls if somebody does have the cell phone number for one or more of these legislators. That can be a way of pressuring them even when they are away from the Capitol. Another thing you can do is pay attention to their schedules. They are often, during a recess, they are moving about the district. They might be holding their own town hall meetings, their own reports on what has happened thus far in the legislature. They also are probably going to various county party functions and various other forums that sometimes business and other civic groups may hold. In Indiana anyway, you'll see groups like that hold a round table of sorts. And sometimes the legislators will show up for these. They'll show up at a Republican or Democrat breakfast or some other kind of party function. And so you can see them, they are out and about at these various events. They also like to raise money. So they might be, I don't know what your specific campaign finance rules are in Michigan, but in Indiana, they are, except for some specific times when they're precluded, but they tend to want to hold fundraisers. And so you'll see legislators holding fundraising events. Now, all of these are fair game for activists and leaders to pressure. So if you have a chance to encounter one of these legislators at a meeting, like a party breakfast or some kind of party function, you wait until there's an opportune moment, and then you can stand up and loudly ask them in front of these other folks at this meeting, why are you not taking action on election reform to prevent fraud and to have a full and fair investigation over what happened in Michigan this last year? And yes, you will be seen as the rude person who has interrupted the quiet, genteel meeting. Okay, but do it anyway, because as uncomfortable as you feel, you are making the legislator feel much more uncomfortable. And so that's a way to handle it with one of those meetings. If they're at a town hall of sorts and they're going to take questions, don't let it be just the other side who gets in the question line. Make sure your people get up there and get in the question line at the microphone and ask the embarrassing question of why they're not moving ahead with these vital election reforms. And you can even have fun at their fundraisers, especially if they're at some kind of a swanky restaurant or maybe a country club, and they're just hoping the high rollers will come in there and give them big checks. Well, if you find out when and where this is going to be, you can have a group. It's best if you have some adults and maybe even some kids. So if you've got some families involved in your movement, get some hand-painted signs that say, Senator Snort refuses to work for election integrity, or variations on that theme.
Yep.
You handwrite or hand paint these signs, and you get out there at the entrance to this restaurant or this country club, and you've got your kids and the adults waving signs as these people are coming into the place. And it is irresistible street theater. It'll be embarrassing to the donors. It'll be embarrassing to good old Senator Snort in this case. And not only you should create your own press, definitely record this with phones and whatnot, get it out on social media. But if there's any, what I would call lamestream press that shows up at this event, protesters with hand-painted signs are irresistible. You are probably going to make the local media by doing that. And this is embarrassment for legislators who badly need this because they're not doing their jobs.
Yeah, one of the gentlemen in chat actually organized a demonstration at a local Secretary of State office. Secretary of State is what we call our DMV in Michigan. Okay. And they've been just totally shut down because of COVID. Even after the governor opened the state up again, the SOS branches are still shut down. He organized a demonstration. He actually recorded the whole thing himself and sent the video and the pictures and a story as a letter to his local paper, which picked it up, and the Detroit News, which picked it up. And that's, yep, there is that. And what about, since David asked about this earlier, what about knocking on doors? How's knocking on doors work for you?
Well, I think in terms of mobilizing voters, I think that is a great thing to do. Now, you have a higher batting average when you are working with people who are concerned about the issue. So you're generally going to want to work off of a list if you are knocking on doors. And a couple different ways you can do this. If you have already lists of supporters, if you have lists of people who are on board with your plan to seek these election reforms, you definitely should be reaching out to all of your supporters as often as possible. You should be doing that with, electronics, email, social media. If you have their phone numbers, you should be doing text blasts to them to get them involved. But yeah, if there's a group of your supporters, especially, and you can also kind of tie this into working the neighborhoods of some of these legislators. So I'll give you an example from the life issue in Indiana. We had a committee chair who was refusing to hear a bill to protect innocent life, to a life at conception bill. He had blocked this thing a number of years in a row. And so finally, some of our life activists, they headed up to this committee chair's home neighborhood, and they started knocking on the doors of the committee chairman's neighbors. And they started having one-on-one conversations explaining how their neighbor, who was the chairman of this influential committee, was refusing to hear a bill that would save innocent human lives. And then when they got done talking to all the neighbors, they went ahead and knocked on the legislator's door too. And they had a civil conversation with him. He wasn't very happy. He also wasn't very happy they talked to all of his neighbors. But that is a way of bringing the pressure really, really close to home for this legislator. And in one case, this chairman, he also was rude to our champion, to our inside leader in the legislature.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes you gotta tune up the pressure, and we are going to make sure always when we're following the mobilization and confrontation model, we're going to have the back of our people on the inside. So when this chairman was particularly rude to our chairman, a group of life activists traveled to this chairman's church on a Sunday morning, and they flyed the cars, the windshields on the cars, in the parking lot at his church, and let the members of his church know what he was up to, and that he was still not willing to hear a bill that would protect innocent human life, and the way he was treating another member of the legislature. And of course, that was very awkward, and we were called all kinds of names. But here's the thing. If you want to get these folks moved to action, you are going to have to be prepared to make them uncomfortable. And this is also going to mean that you are going to be uncomfortable. Now, understand, Of course, the left loves to bring violence into politics. We don't practice violence. We don't advocate violence. But you do have to understand how the left has violence as an undercurrent to so many things that they do. And if you're not aware of how the left uses violence, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. So, but everything that we're talking about, that I'm talking about, you are going to be using simple means of civil discourse. You are going to be seeking to persuade these legislators using speech, using methods of speech, that you need them to do what you want, which in this case is to get moving on these election reforms.
Yeah, you make an important point there about the left and these tactics that we've been talking about, because tactics are ideologically neutral. And, what works for one party works for the other. Well, violence does not work for our side, but violence is the most extreme form of pressure that is beyond our conscience, but not theirs. But a big part of this is that the reason why politicians won't do what we're asking for is because they view the other side as the greater threat. They're more afraid of the left attacking them for supporting election reform than for us if they don't. That's what it boils down to, right?
Well, yes, absolutely. And that's where the email, the letters that have been coming your way, that's how they play into it. See, the legislators are betting that they can get your folks, that they can get the folks who care about election reform to back off with a nice letter, with a nice email, with a nice talking to from this other allied group. And because if they can get you all to back off on the pressure, then they don't have to move ahead with this election reform package, which is something sure to stir up the left. And your legislators, despite what they tell you in private meetings, they don't want to move ahead with this because they don't want to face that political pain. So you are going to have to let them know that it is going to be more painful for them politically to not move on this than for them to go ahead and do the right thing.
Yeah, there's a question in chat. How is our Senate Majority Leader beholden to the rhinos? And you don't know our Senate Majority Leader, but I'll bet you know the answer to that question anyway, huh?
Well, the leadership of a given legislature, it's just important for all of you to understand, while the other members of the legislature, they have their ear to the voters back home, a member of leadership, their constituents really, in many important respects, are the other members of their party in the legislature. Okay, and sadly, the way these things play out, someone like a legislative leader is going to be most influenced by the most moderate or most liberal members of the Republican Party. That is just that is a sad reality of the way that politics works. And so if you are not able to be a countervailing force, a counterbalancing force, pushing that person, pushing that party back to the right, then yes, they are going to seek to cave to the interests of the rhinos and cave to the middle of the establishment every single time. This is a key difference. When the left gets people elected, they stay on them. They keep pressuring them. Sometimes it's encouragement, but most of the time it's just pressure. They keep pressuring them. And our people, to our detriment, we get someone elected, we think it's a good person, and then we want to wash our hands of the whole situation and see, now there, we got a good person in the legislature. Now I don't have to work at this anymore. That good person in the legislature is going to fight for liberty and solve all my problems. And that is so wrong. We as citizens have fallen down on the job. We cannot lay the blame for this whole situation that we have in politics in this country on the politicians. Yes, much of it is the politicians, and much of it, frankly, is the Republican politicians. But we as activists need to look ourselves in the mirror and acknowledge we have not been a counterbalancing pressure from the right the way the leftists have been pressuring these folks for decades and decades.
Yeah, I think it goes back to David's comment in the beginning about how many doors have you knocked on. We have a lot of people, and they know who they are, who love to complain. But when it comes to having to do shoe leather work, like knocking on doors, dropping literature across a precinct, sending in a letter, writing a letter, they don't want to do it. They'd rather argue on Facebook or wherever else they are these days. They haven't been exiled from everything. It really does come down to what you're ready to build in your district. You know, one of the things that I keep talking about with people is, you know, we've got a lot of organizations that are state-based, and we've got a few that are county-based. There are people who are fed up with what's going on in every single subdivision, on every single street, in every single city and county in our state. I mean, I live in the most liberal county in Michigan. Washington County was 75% Biden, 25% Trump. You know what that means? There was still 50,000 Trump voters in this county. They are everywhere. And the people that were not engaging are the ones that you're not going to find online. But they're the ones you might find when you knock on their doors. And it's going to be a great summer, folks. Weather's been beautiful. And the lawmakers, they've got next year's election on their mind. Strangely, that they aren't passing election reform, which might threaten their entire majority. Oddly enough, but that's how deep this runs. I mean, as you were saying earlier, I mean, the entire political system leans to the left. Because all those special interests in Lansing, they're not advocating for conservative causes. They're advocating for those little bitty things you were talking about in the beginning, the change on the tax form, the minor little thing that doesn't really do much of anything, and it accumulates. There's going to be a budget coming up soon. Are they going to withhold $300 million for University of Michigan? A prime left-wing indoctrination center that's also entirely financially self-sustainable? Not without pressure. And there's a lot of issues out there to talk about on that. But let's fast forward a little bit. So we were talking about applying pressure. We've got the summer ahead of us. What happens next year when the election season starts to heat up a little bit? Right now, there's just been some rumblings about who might run for governor, who might run for attorney general. Not too many filed candidates in the House and Senate races. There's going to be some incumbents retiring. There's going to be some politicians seeking election. What happens next year if we don't get our way, if they haven't done any meaningful election reform or any other meaningful conservative agenda items for that matter? What happens then? Dan, can you hear me?
Yeah. Is that a question for me?
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is, how do you respond? What do you do? And like rhetorically, I know the answer to this question, but what happens if we don't get what we want? What do we do then? Or what will they have us do? Let's start with that question. What does the politician turn to in election season?
Yeah, well, the politicians, when it comes to election season, they are always wanting folks back home to forget what happened in the past legislative sessions. They want to put legislative season behind them and come home and try to get the folks from their hometown to vote for them again, because they will assure you they're just a little bit better than the other candidate. And so this is the way it is done in all states. It's the way it's done in Indiana. I know it's the way it's done in Michigan. So there are actually several benefits to folks on the call doing what Adam was talking about just a little bit ago, which is doing some door-to-door canvassing. See, when Adam made a point, it is just so vital. There are people in every block, on every country mile of every precinct throughout all the counties in Michigan who feel the way the people in this call feel. They're frustrated. They see the America that they have come to love just being assaulted from so many quarters. But these folks, they don't have a call like this to be on. They don't have a group like this yet to be a part of their world. And so they're just sitting there in quiet despair in their own homes because they don't know how to get involved. And so you doing a canvas in your home precinct, in your hometown, and going through, let's take Adams County as an example. If he and a merry band of his friends were to work very hard the rest of this year and into the winter and spring of next year and have a thorough canvass of the entire county, yes, they're outnumbered dramatically, but the fact is, in an off-year election, a lot of people don't vote. And so with a careful canvassing of the entire county, of knowing precisely who those 25% of the people were who voted for the Republican team in last year's election, that would be such helpful information in both the legislative seasons and in next year's election season. And so bringing that full circle, what your folks do, you need to pressure right now, pressure the legislators to do the right thing. And then if it comes to next year, to 2022, when the legislators, let's assume they have not done the right thing, they did not pass an election reform package, well, you need to make sure there is a price of political pain for bad behavior. Now, that can mean spreading the word and letting the voters know exactly what these legislators did. But often what that means is the folks on this call will need to be thinking about who could we recruit to run for different legislative seats, for example.
Yeah.
I try very hard to keep my focus on legislative activity, on the legislature. I have people in Indiana constantly ask me who's going to run for governor, who's going to run for these, and I try very hard to keep disciplined and not thinking on that level, because there's too much money flying around in those statewide races. But if people will focus on in their backyard at the state house and state legislature, these are still districts that are sized such that you and a handful of your friends can go out and recruit somebody to run for one of these seats, and you can make a meaningful difference in an election. So I would encourage the people on this call, especially if the legislature does not take action on the election reforms, do not sit back and ask to yourself and wonder who's going to run for these various seats. In my opinion, it's loser talk to sit back and wonder who's going to run for the seats. You should go out and recruit people to run for the seats where you want there to be a choice, you want there to be pressure and pain on the incumbents. And to be specific, I am talking about primary challenges. I'm talking about challenging these folks in their party's primary. That is where you will cause these incumbents the greatest amount of political pain, is by challenging what they think is their right that is to be bestowed on them, that the party, of course, will automatically renominate them. And if you challenge that assumption and have someone run and you point out the bad behavior of the incumbent, there's no way of knowing how the election will turn out, but you will be causing political pain to people who badly deserve it.
Right. There's actually a comment in the chat saying we need to primary them. And then before I could address it, then you got right to it. So there you go. Let's see. Another message in the chat. Michigan House Republicans eliminated roll call votes on budget amendments which allowed rhinos to hide voting against budget cuts in corporate and liberal programs. David, since you've left office, they've eliminated roll call votes on all amendments in Michigan. That's how bad that is. But there will be roll call votes anyway. There'll be roll call votes on, well, first of all, everything that's not a budget, there's still the bill itself. And then there will be the budget. And they can be attacked for anything that's in that budget. Let's see. A couple other, let me just look through these chat comments real quickly here. We can't even find someone to run against. Okay, here's a great point. Jay says, we can't even find someone to run against the Democrat senator in Oxford Township. This is where knocking on doors is also critical. Because not just for engaging with voters, although that's obviously very important, but that's also how you find the right people to run for these seats. And by the way, that might not be you. In fact, it usually is not, folks. Look, I mean, I love politics. I'm certainly qualified. I've worked in the legislature for years, but I understand I'm not candidate material. And frankly, most of the people who are extremely passionate about politics aren't good candidates because they are unable to subordinate their passions into making a charismatic presentation. The people that get elected are people who are the kind of people that the voters can see themselves being friends with, that they can see themselves having a beer with, that they can see themselves going to church with. That's the kind of person. And when you knock on doors, you'll find people like that. And that's where getting out and knocking on doors in yet another way is so important, is that it's where you identify the people that just have great candidate written all over them. And in case you haven't noticed, folks, we're looking for a lot of them, not just for legislature. We got school board races coming up. I know there's plenty of crazy things happening in our school boards. Often local governments, local elections. Some of those are happening too. So, let's go back to talking about election season. Actually, you know what? Excuse me briefly. If you want to go on a riff for a little bit, talking about the biggest lie in politics, I'm going to put some dogs outdoors because they're getting distracting here. I'll be right back.
Sure. So, the greatest lie in politics is something else that we spend quite a bit of time talking about with the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. And the greatest lie in politics is designed to convince the folks back home that they should separate what happened during the legislative season to what's about to happen during the election season. Because the greatest lie in politics is that good people are obligated to support the lesser of two evils. Now, this is frankly how most of the rhinos end up getting elected, because they will convince voters back home, for example, that they are 2 to 5 to 10% better than the candidate from the other party. And so they will ask their voters to ignore all of this bad behavior because they will claim that they are the lesser of two evils. And there's so much wrong with that. I mean, the first problem with it is the lesser of two evils is, of course, still evil. The second problem with feeling obligated, for example, to support the lesser of two evils is it demoralizes our own people. Okay? Many of you probably know folks who have dropped out of politics altogether because they've concluded that there's no difference between the candidates and the parties. Another reason why you should not feel obligated to support the lesser of two evils is we're not going to be able to get the right behavior from politicians by rewarding bad behavior. See, when you come back and vote in favor of candidates who have betrayed you, it's kind of like for the pet owners on the call. If you're trying to potty train a dog or a dog, and the dog keeps going to the bathroom inside, and you give the dog a treat, a reward every time the dog goes to the bathroom inside, just ask yourself how that potty training program is going to work for the dog. And then for the parents on the call, ask yourself, if you gave your child a piece of candy every time the child disobeyed, how would that work for you overall in raising your child? Yet this is what happens all too often when politicians convince voters they're obligated to support the lesser of two evils. And then the final problem with supporting the lesser of two evils is it's usually not even true, okay? Because often the supposed lesser evil ends up being the greater threat to our liberties. And one of the best ways to explain this is, ironically, think about the presidency right now. I didn't wish for Joe Biden to be the president, and I didn't wish for the Democrats to be in charge of the Congress. But I can tell you that all over the country, we have way more conservatives paying attention to politics and wanting to be trained by the foundation because they are now newly and very concerned about their liberties in a way that only a couple of years ago, they were not concerned. And sadly, the Republicans, when they were running things in Washington, they were also spending way too much money. They were also doing really bad things to our liberties. And a lot of people out across the fruited plain, they were not paying attention to politics. So it's oftentimes when the alleged greater of the evils is in office that we start having a lot more folks on the right pay attention, get engaged, and then that longer term, that can lead to better things in politics for us.
Right. Yeah, it's spot on. And we're going to see it happen, folks. You're going to see it come next election. I mean, my congressman's perfect example. He sends emails all the time, and all it says is, we got to beat the Democrats. Give me money. We got to beat the Democrats. Give me money. And that's all there is to it. But what do you do if you live in a congressional district where your Republican congressman voted for the second sham impeachment of Donald Trump? What kind of message is that going to send if something that radical is tolerated by the Republican base? What kind of message does it send when Senator McBroom's Oversight Committee report doesn't prevent him from being reelected in that district? Oh, well, I guess we can do that now. And these things have consequences. In Michigan, I'll tell you a horrible story. During the second sham impeachment, I was thinking at the time it was happening, this is going to be the start of an escalation of the war on free speech and an escalation on the war on the right to counsel. We are seeing both of those things happening right now in the state Senate and in the judicial system in Michigan. We have a guy, he was a college student who posted a photo of a rifle he spent the summer saving up for on Snapchat. And his message was, "This ought to make some snowflakes melt, eh?" Sent to his friends. Someone who did not even receive that snap saw it on a friend's computer, reported him to the police, and he has been charged with making a terrorist threat, which is a 20-year felony in Michigan. The Michigan Court of Appeals, I think yesterday, issued a decision denying him his appeal, saying the case should be thrown out because it was clearly protected First Amendment speech. And this is where courts are going now. But what happens when every single Democrat and a few rhinos go along with a sham impeachment like that? What's the message they've sent? We can get away with this. We can get away with trampling the Constitution. If there's no punishment for that bad behavior, we're going to get more of it. And that's, I mean, you can't tell people vote for the Democrat, but you don't have to support the Republican. And, you know, my time, talent, and treasure are limited. My congressman doesn't need my support. I've got other races to be involved with candidates I actually do believe in. And that's where we got to go, folks. If you can't find the right candidate to run for these seats, find something else. But don't be the patsy telling your friends and neighbors to vote for the rhino because it's the lesser of two evils. I mean, we are how many seats away from a congressional majority in the House? 8 seats. How many in the Senate? 1. We can afford to lose 1 or 2 and pick up 3 or 4 elsewhere in this entire country, right? Do we need Fred Upton and Peter Meyer in Washington next year? And, you know, Fred Upton's district is conservative. A Democrat might take the seat for 2 years. We might actually get a different Republican, which will never happen if you keep electing the same guy over and over and over again. Isn't that right? All right, let's take some questions in the chat. Let me just read some of these out here. Oh, Marcia says, Adam, let everyone know that they can get a list from you of who the potential Republicans are. And she says, for a donation. Let me clarify our policy. So, Dan, if you don't know, at Rescue Michigan, we offer voter files for anybody anywhere in the state on their individual precincts. And not just the public record voter files you can get from the Secretary of State. Lists that have all kinds of crazy enhancements. Phone numbers, party affiliation, issue micro-targeting, donation history, all that kind of stuff. And it is behind a paywall for 2 reasons. One is we actually have to order the lists every time someone requests one. It does cost us money. It's not entirely for a donation. We're paying for the product that we're buying. But also it keeps the other side from being able to get those lists for free, which would be a problem. But yeah, rescuemichigan.com. If you are looking for a list of hot leads in your precincts, you don't have to bother knocking on the doors of Democrats. Go to rescuemichigan.com, sign up. You can obtain your voter file, and that will find you the best people that you can identify in your own neighborhood. And like I say, folks, you can build your own grassroots organization just doing that. And coming back again to that question, people are talking about, we can't find someone to run for the state senate in our district. How many millionaires are there in your district? Now, let me put this in perspective. To be the candidate, you got to be, well, number one, you got to be willing to. You got to be able to. You got to be a certain time in your life. You can't have young kids at home. If you're too old, you're not going to be healthy enough to walk and knock on 10,000 doors. So you got to find the right person. And that's why it's all a numbers game. And Dan, maybe that's a good prompt for you to talk about numbers and maybe to come back to talking again about, well, really everything we've talked about, lobbying the legislature, creating pressure, that it's all a numbers game. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. the best way to probably think about the numbers is thinking about the electoral reality in a precinct, in a primary contest, like we were discussing just a little bit ago.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about a legislative district, most people conjure up in their mind an image of needing 50% plus one of the votes to win a district like that. And that's correct. That's what you learned back in government class back in the day. But when you start drilling down, and we teach this in our classes, you will realize that by doing your homework, by starting with one of the lists that Adam was just offering you for the asking for a very maybe modest donation, but starting, you get one of those lists and you are already drilling down within a given district. So let's say it's a state house district and you're looking to challenge an incumbent who is behaving badly. By you starting with one of those lists, you can now do several reductions in the voters that you need to visit. So first of all, you can eliminate the people who are not eligible to vote. Okay. From there, you can also weed out the people who are not registered currently to vote. And then if it's a comprehensive voter list, it might, in Indiana, I know that ours tend to have the voter history. So They probably have some voter history information for you. And from that, you're able to determine whether this person is likely to turn out to vote. So you want to remember that the election next year is going to be an off year, a non-presidential year, 2022. And so, yes, there will be some state house and some state senate elections in Indiana and also in Michigan.
Every state senate seat is up in Michigan next year. Yep. Also, by the way, our lists have not just vote history, but also primary history and which presidential primary they voted in.
That is perfect, because that's further weeding out of these folks that when you do this careful study, this careful preparation, what you're doing is you're making your scarce resources go farther, because you now don't need to knock on doors where the people are not eligible or registered to vote. And you're not knocking on the doors where they are registered, but they're a Democrat. And you're not knocking on doors where they are registered and they might or might not be a Republican, but they only vote in the fall, or they only vote in a presidential year. You will have drilled down to people who, assuming you're working in a Republican primary, you'll have drilled down to people who are registered. They pull a Republican ballot in the primary, and they tend to vote in non-presidential years in the primary. Now, by you doing that, you probably have sliced turnout down to where you don't need 50% plus one anymore. You might be down to where turnout is now, 20%, for example, of the overall electorate. In an off-year election in Indiana a few years ago, our statewide turnout was 8%. Now, when you drill down that far, and you assume in a given primary there are going to be a chunk of partisans who are going to vote for the Rhino, and another chunk of the partisans who are likely to vote already for the conservative challenger, you're down to this tiny group in the middle. And in the end, this is where your numbers game kicks in, because the doors that you have knocked, you paying attention to what people said will motivate them to vote, and then you being able to reach out to them and give them critical information in the days leading up to an election, you can suddenly sway that small group of voters in the middle who are actually going to make the determination about who wins that primary. Yep. And it's going to be considerably less than 50% plus one. In our foundation training, we say that usually it will get down to 3% plus one. That is what is going to swing most elections. But I tell people that's the model is for a fall contest. If you drill down to a primary, oftentimes that will be as little as 1% plus one will actually swing who wins a contested primary. So think
Yep.
about how few votes that actually is. This is totally doable by anybody on this call getting a handful of your friends together this summer, deciding you're going to have meetings every couple weeks around somebody's kitchen table. You're going to talk about who's the perfect person to run for the state house next year. You're going to have meetings with that individual. You're going to patiently recruit them to run for the state house. And then you're not going to leave it up to them alone. You and your team are going to provide a support base around that person, and you are going to help them make phone calls, raise some money, and then get a good list and go knock on doors. And you are going to help them campaign and cause unbelievable political pain to an incumbent who desperately deserves it.
Yep.
So
And-
that's an example of using the politics as a numbers game in electoral politics. And when it comes to pressure of the legislature, you just need to understand that, again, it comes back to these numbers. Whether they're back in the district or whether they are in session, they might pretend to ignore you, but I promise they are paying attention when people are reaching out to them and demanding action on a particular issue.
You're exactly right. And I would add to that even, knocking out a politician in the primary, you're talking about proving pain to a politician for not doing what you want
Adam,
to do.
I can't hear you all of a sudden.
Oh, you can't hear me at all? No? Hold on. Let me see what I can do here. Hold on one sec. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Nope, I still can't hear you.
All right, let me try again. How about now? Does that work? No? All right, let me try one more thing. Here, how about this? Can you hear me this time? Hold on one sec. I know what to do. I'll be right back. Okay, is this better? Let's see here. How about now? Can you hear me again? No?
Nope, I still cannot hear you, Adam.
All right, let me see if I can fix this. Testing, testing. How about now? How about now? Can you hear that? Dan? Is this any better? Dan, can you hear me yet? All right, can you in the chat hear me? Let me know in the chat if you guys can hear me right now. It's showing up on my end. But maybe not. Oh, how about this? Is this better?
Okay, yes, I can hear
Oh,
you.
phew.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. All right, I just had to push the button to unmute myself. Not sure how that happened. I apologize. All right. So anyway, I was just going to say thank you for all of that. But let me just, I would add one thing. We're talking about pain and pleasure. And knocking out a politician in a primary is beyond pain. That's death. But pain is the actions that lead towards political death. And even if you don't fully knock out a guy in his primary, if you're taking resources that he wanted to spend running for leadership and has to instead spend now defending his good name and reputation in the district, that's some pretty good damage there too. And with that, I think we've covered a lot of topics. It is 10:15, and I do have Tony here. I need to apologize profusely to for screwing up his audio. But I did want to close with a plug for you guys, the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership, because you guys have some schools coming up in Michigan. So I'm going to put a link in the description for this video on YouTube, and we have promoted a couple of them in the emails coming up, and in prior emails. So we will make multiple notes about that. But there are 2 political leadership schools coming up in Michigan that are going to cover all this and much, 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 much more. They are, I think, approximately 6 or 7 hours long each, and they're not expensive. I think it's $50 to attend a class. So there are 2 schools coming up. The first is a grassroots leadership school, and that is in Gaylord, Michigan, which is way up north. But in the summertime, everyone in Michigan should be taking every opportunity to go up north anytime they can make it. And that is on Saturday, July 17th. So I think it's just 4 weeks from now. It would be exactly 4 weeks from now, I think. Maybe less. Let me double check my calendar here. Today's the 26th. Yeah, Saturday the 17th of July, 4 weeks from today. There is an all-day political leadership training happening in Gaylord, Michigan. I will post the link so you guys can sign up for that. And there's also a campaign school coming up for those who want to run for office. So I'll just put this on the screen briefly so you can see. This is in Brighton, Michigan, which incidentally happens to be the hometown of the chair of the House Elections Committee and the senator that co-signed the oversight, the chair of the House Elections Committee's district, and that of one of the co-signers in the Senate of the Senate Oversight Committee report. So that's a wonderful location for that school to be held. A happy coincidence, I am sure. And that is on Saturday, August 21st in Brighton, Michigan, which is just in south central Michigan. So easy place to come to. And that's going to be all about how to run an effective campaign. It's great for candidates. It's great for volunteers. It's great for campaign staff. So I'll be sure to put those links in the description. And finally, if you want to book a school, they'll teach. What's the smallest school you guys try to teach? I mean, I know obviously you try to teach as large as possible, but if 20, 30 people want to organize a school in their community, what does it take?
Sure. Let me plug one other school in addition to the 2 fine schools that you mentioned. We are going to have one more activist school coming up on July 24, and that is going to be in West Bloomfield.
Oh, there you go.
So, yep. So we have July 17 in Gaylord, July 24 in West Bloomfield. Both of those are the political activist schools. And then August 21 in Brighton, and that's the campaign management school. For all of them, you're quite right, Adam. It's the normal price is $50. However, for at least another week for Gaylord and for a little longer for the other schools, they have an early bird rate, and you can sign up for $40. And keep in mind, we feed you lunch and we feed you snacks throughout the day. If you account for the cost of the lunch and the snacks, you are getting excellent political training for probably around $3 to $4 an hour. It is amazing. We price this because we don't want anybody priced out of being able to come to one of these. So definitely encourage people to consider it. And to your other question, if anybody would like to have one closer to home, what we ask is that you get 20 activists together on the same Saturday. And if you can get at least 20 activists together on a given Saturday, we will bring you the instructor. You need to secure a place to have the class. You need to make arrangements for the lunch and the snacks, although we will reimburse you for all of the above. And then, but the main thing is you will need to make phone calls or do personal invitations to get your friends to go ahead and sign up and to get those 20 people coming together on the same day. That is what it takes to host a class with the foundation.
Excellent. And I've put that up on my screen as well. You can see that website, FACL-training.org. It's at the top of my, you see that there? I just highlighted FACL-training.org. training.org, and there's a contact button. You can request a school. So if you'd like to have a school in your own neighborhood, there you go, folks. Get 20 people together and organize one. It is the best training in the business. I am a proud alum of the foundation, and I'm grateful for as many more of us as we can get trained as we possibly can. So with that, Dan, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I hope it was informative for all of the viewers. If you want to, if you ask any questions before we adjourn for the night, we'll give you a moment or two to type them in right now. Otherwise, I'll just read off a few chats to see if there's anything else that hasn't been addressed yet. Oh, Marcia asked, do you think in the House and Senate races in Michigan, people haven't committed because the new lines haven't been drawn yet? That's a great point. We have redistricting coming up, and what that can mean, because the redistricting is going to be done by a so-called nonpartisan committee, which is almost certainly overrun by leftists. They can actually gerrymander lawmakers right out of their own districts. That may happen. And you might not know what district you're running in until after those lines are finalized. But all the more reason to be constantly looking out for who might run, for who is willing to run, because any seat might be open if that's what comes up in the coming year.
Yeah, I agree. I would not, with respect to redistricting, you're right. That's an unknown. It's hanging over Indiana's process as well. But what I'm encouraging our activists who are asking about this to do is, you still want to keep your eyes open for good people, and you should be bringing them along. You should be, if you find a good prospect for running for office, having them maybe come to that campaign management school or even the activist school, and just cultivating that working relationship with them, because there will be lines drawn and there will be districts available for them to run. We just don't know exactly how those chips will fall yet. But the point is, don't wait. Don't sit back and wait until the lines are drawn. You should definitely be on the lookout for good, solid people who could be candidates.
Yep. Rosemary asks, if we don't get election reform, will the Republicans still be able to win? I think there's kind of two different angles that you can take that question. So let me try to address both of them, and Dan, let me know if I get anything wrong here. But I think there's two things she's asking. One is, if we don't have election reform, will they just steal all the elections from here on out? And I think there is a limit to how much they can do on that, and especially in odd years. I mean, part of what happened. Yeah, they always try to steal as many votes as they can, but there's an upper limit to how many votes can actually be taken that way. And I know some people disagree because they think the Dominion machines just flip the votes from one side right to the other. But as someone that's worked on campaigns for many, many years, and knowing how there are so many ways and so many people that have to be involved, because the elections are all tabulated at the precinct level. Also, we do surveys. I mean, the results of an election might be off by 4 or 5 percentage points, and that can be enough to change an election, but it can't go much higher than that. And even that's actually a very large amount of corruption if it even gets that high. So, yeah, vote fraud is a problem. That's why we're trying to address it, but it's not insurmountable. And you remember, Democrats try to rig elections as much as they can all the time. So, I think that went into overdrive with the election last year, because a large swath of the Democrat Party would do anything to defeat Donald Trump. I don't think you're going to have quite that level going on, certainly not next year, and depending on 2024, probably not nearly so much. But the other thing to your point is, if we don't get election reform, will the Republicans still be able to win? As we've been talking about, the question is, how much pressure are we going to be putting on them? If they don't get election reform done, the question that we must answer is, what will be the consequences for that behavior?
Right, exactly. I just want to chime in on a couple other things, because when I teach the classes, believe me, corruption is on people's minds, and it comes up a lot during the classes. And what I share with them, several points that Adam made, keep in mind, there's always been a certain amount of corruption in American politics. Historically, it's usually been confined to the big cities, and it's usually been one Democratic faction sticking it to another Democratic faction. That is usually how the worst of think of a city like Philadelphia. There would be a chunk of Democrats that's in charge, and they're constantly sticking it to the other Democrat factions because it's a one-party town, okay? Now, the other thing to keep in mind about corruption when it comes to elections is all of us need to go back and look in the mirror, because this is to some degree our fault as activists out here on the fruited plain for not paying attention. As much as the Democrats wanted to steal votes, a lot of us learned it sure matters who the state election official is in all 50 states. Now, this in Indiana, that's the Secretary of State. That might be somebody different for you in Michigan, but all 50 states have somebody who's in charge of this election process. And most of us probably just thought that's a paper pusher. We don't really have to worry about who that is. Well, it turns out we do have to worry about who that is. And then at the county level, I have heard of instances in more than one state where people found out to their great disappointment that the Republican county chairman was not appointing Republican partisans to these election day duties in precincts. In other words, the Democrats had their partisans in place to, quote, to watch the election, but these folks found out later their Republican chairman was putting people in as watchers in these precincts who did not have a history of voting or otherwise being Republicans. Now, that is just inviting the other side to steal votes. And so the folks in these counties, they got upset. They went ahead and threw that Republican chairman out, and they have a new Republican county chairman. And that is the other way that you address this corruption. You address it one local office at a time, and you quit saying to yourself, oh, good old Joe's in that job. Joe's looking out for us. No, it matters what Joe's beliefs are, and it matters how Joe behaves when he's under pressure. And some of these people that we've been thinking are just our good friend local Republican officials, if they're not behaving like limited government conservatives, it's time for them to go. And we're going to have to make tough decisions about who should be the county Republican chairman and who should be these election officials all across the states of America.
Right. Bob Ranke says clerks are mostly Dems. Yep, we got to do a lot more to vet our candidates for clerk. No question about that. William Hamilton asks, do you believe what happened in Antrim County? Well, I guess it depends. Do I believe which happened in Antrim County? And that's a long question to unpack. And I think, Dan, you really just almost got the ball rolling on a long conversation about what to do about the state party and the local parties. Although the principles are the same. The principles are the same. Run for precinct delegate, get involved in the party, know who the players are, know whether or not the chair and the officials are on your side, get involved and stay involved, no matter how painful it is. And believe it, Dan, I'm sure you know, there's nothing more painful than having to be involved in your local Republican Party. But if you don't, others will be there, and our side will not. So with that, Dan, I just want to thank you for taking the time to come on tonight. I hope you guys come to these schools coming up. And again, July 17th, Grassroots Leadership, Gaylord, August 26th, Grassroots Leadership, West Bloomfield, and was it the 19th, I think it was, in Brighton is the campaign management school, and hopefully we'll have many more to come. So thanks for all you guys are doing for Liberty. We're going to try to keep the pressure maximized on the legislature for this last week that they're going to be in session, and then we're going to have a whole summer of fun, one way or the other. Hopefully working positively and productive with newly enlightened advocates for election reform. And if not, hunting for some scalps. So either way, it's going to be a fun summer. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks again, Dan. Thanks for all you do for Liberty. And all you guys on YouTube, please don't forget, give us a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed to our channel. Leaving comments also helps too. This video will be archived at this link. So if you didn't catch it tonight, it'll be archived at the same link, so you can share it around. I'll probably also cross-post it to Rumble in case something happens to our YouTube channel. Can't imagine why that might be. Yeah, and again, check out rescuemichigan.com, get your local voter file, and go out and knock on doors and cause some pain for politicians. Anything else you want to add, Dan, before we call it a night?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to join you, and do encourage people to check out one of those schools, or if you don't see one near you, get on that link, FACL-training.org, and look to host one closer to you. If you're willing to put the people in the chairs, we will bring the training to you.